At the start of the 20th century, a bizarre craze for taxidermy headwear swept the world, managing to push some species of bird towards extinction in the process. If you've ever wondered just what sort of person enjoys wearing dead pets on their head, stay tuned. This is the Overlooked Hotel, and this is the bizarre tale of the taxidermy hats. Now, as we know from events like Royal Ascot, the hat is often as much a statement and attention grabber as anything else, and there are no limits on what it might be beyond what a person can be able to physically hold on the top of their heads, and sometimes not even that will be a stopping point. In the millinery world, there is a curious parallel universe of what we might consider the novelty hat. Extravagant look-at-me creations that are often more costume than couture. Obviously, the line between serious fashion and attention-seeking novelty item is quite often a thin one, with the latter being used to create headlines and so boost the profile of a designer, and that's certainly as true for milliners as it is for any other designer. The wildly impractical outfits that we see on catwalks are often never seriously designed to be worn. We're not knocking it. Wildly eccentric outfits, even if worn by very dull but egocentric people, are more fun than the bland workaday awfulness that dominates the high street. We're all in favour of individualism, even if it is high-end and manufactured individualism. Still, there are moments of fashion excess that have perhaps gone beyond the novelty and into the grotesque. Beginning in the Victorian era and continuing well into the 1920s, there was a curious and decidedly weird trend for taxidermy hats. No one seems quite sure precisely when or how this trend started, but one particularly horrifying early example was that of a Miss Kate Fearing Strong, who attended the 1883 Vanderbilt Ball in New York wearing a hat that featured, as a centerpiece, a taxidermied kitten. As if that wasn't enough, she also had 7 cats' tails sewn onto her dress. We might wonder just where these body parts came from, but perhaps that's not a thought that is good to dwell on. I dare say that if somebody were to venture out in this today, they would probably need to be very quickly taken into protective custody, and would frankly deserve all the abuse they got. But this was a different time, and everybody thought that her hat was a jolly jape, it seems. The hat certainly got its wearer the attention that she presumably craved, and helped popularise the idea of taxidermy fashion. Taxidermy in general was a bit of a Victorian craze, so we shouldn't be surprised that a variety of dead animals would appear on hats. Given that even today there are still weird people who will wear fox and mink stoles with the dead animal's head still attached, perhaps these hats from over a century ago shouldn't be so unexpected. But, animal rights issues and arguments about hypocrisy from meat eaters aside, no one's going to convince me that wearing a stuffed chicken on the top of your hat isn't weird and creepy. Or, for that matter, that it looks striking and daring rather than breathtakingly stupid. The animals most used for hats were, of course, birds. After all, feathers have long been a popular embellishment for a hat, and at the start of the 20th century, the craze for feathered hats was out of control. This was a time before both artificial feathers and concerns about entire species being driven to extinction were really things, and animal slaughter for fun and fashion was all the rage. Obviously, the more exotic the plumage, the more popular it was. No one was looking to decorate their hats with pigeon feathers. To supply the number of feathers that milliners needed, a lot of wild birds needed to be killed. An aigrette tiara took the feathers of 4 egrets to make, and those feathers weren't being cast off and collected from the ground. Egrets, for those of you unfamiliar with ornithology, are small white herons, and their feathers are both attractive and eminently suitable for dyeing. It's been claimed that in the early 1900s, 5 million of the birds a year were being killed in Florida alone. There was no supplementary use for the egret beyond the feathers. It's not as though the carcass was being eaten by man nor beast. Such wholesale slaughter for the sake of fashion began to push certain species towards the point of extinction, and eventually this would lead to a huge pushback against the women who wore these hats. In a precursor to the anti-fur movements of later decades, the aigrette hat was dubbed the white badge of cruelty. Growing public outrage and political lobbying finally led in the US to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, offering some protection of birds and their eggs. The act makes it illegal to hunt, capture, kill or sell over 1,000 bird species without a license. But it doesn't actually prevent the killing of these birds, and the law has been under threat in recent years, with Donald Trump attempting to weaken it during his first presidency. But the act did at least halt the wholesale, unregulated slaughter that had been previously taking place in the US. More significantly, it helped shift public opinion, and the taxidermy hat quickly began to go from eye-catching fashion statement to social unacceptability. There is, of course, a great deal of difference between the massacre of endangered species for plumage and taxidermied animals, which involves many species and many causes of death. Taxidermy, perhaps unexpectedly, remains as popular as ever, and something that we'll probably come back to at some point, because God knows there are some very weird examples out there. And some defiant milliners have continued the trend of putting dead animals on hats as a way of catching the eye. Admittedly, none seem to be using kittens anymore. Just as some fashionistas still use fur as a way of grabbing attention, because all publicity is good publicity it seems, so some will always go for cheap outrage, knowing that critics will always rise to the occasion and give them the attention that they desire. It's a look, I guess, but perhaps one that will remain decidedly and deservedly niche, if only because while walking into an event wearing dead squirrel on your head these days will absolutely make you the centre of attention, but it probably won't be in a way that you'll enjoy. If you enjoy this sort of oddball narrative, then make sure to click the like button, subscribe, and share this with friends and family. I doff my kitten hat to you in thanks. And feel free to leave a comment about this bizarre fashion trend. Would you wear one of these hats? Maybe that's not something you want to tell the wider world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.